Okay, another one of these little book things. This is not the first one sent by a viewer, but the only other things that I think viewers have sent me have been religious texts of one sort or another. This comes close. It's called The Ontological Fracture, titled The Crack Between Quantum Mechanical Description and Reality and What May Lie Therein. I felt especially that I need to speak to this because, I was asked, is it okay if I send you this? I said, yeah, not really knowing what it was, but then when it arrived, apparently special ordered it for me. So that makes it, somewhat different from just, oh, here's a copy of, something on my philosophy or whatever that I wanted to send you, which I've had a couple of people do, and that's fine. In this particular case, I have the feeling it's because I tie in some of my metaphysics, etc., into every now and then bringing quantum mechanics into play. I have to say, though, the first thing that I ran across with this is that I'm incapable of reading something at this level in many different ways at this point. To begin with, although the author tries to talk about it being something, that he gives introductions to both the quantum side and sort of the ontology that works in classical physics, essentially. Well, this supposed introduction was over my head. I had a great deal of trouble, especially dealing with the quantum side of things. I am an absolute neophyte in terms of this, less than that. I haven't taken any classes on quantum physics. All I've gotten is sort of glimpses here and there from other discussions and whatnot. But I do understand certain aspects of it that I bring in and tie to my animism, and maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, it goes into a discussion of kind of how classical physics sort of works, and why sort of the ontology of it, the story that it tells is just intuitive to us and again works, but it doesn't hold together under measurements and under, some of the detailed sorts of experimentation that we can do now, which means that it's not sufficient. And strangely enough, not strangely, but the whole wacky world of quantum mechanics and quantum physics actually does seem to represent the world as it is better than, what our understanding of the more, what our more intuitive understanding, the classical physics, seems to, would reflect. There are problems that show up. Given that I couldn't really get and understand the arguments on the quantum side well enough, I couldn't understand where the equations came from, etc. Maybe there's not enough detail in the book. Maybe what you really need to approach and tackle this book is actually, an introduction to quantum mechanics or quantum physics. It left me in a position where it was very, very difficult to work my way through the beginning of this book. And it's not something I recommend to anyone who doesn't have a better understanding of the quantum world than I do. Now, that becomes particularly problematic because then the third section goes into how people are trying to resolve certain issues. In particular, he's bothering with the measurement problem in quantum physics, which has to do with the collapse of the quantum state into a singular value, which reflects this idea, the kind of the spooky action at a distance type of thing, right? He never once mentions the observer effect, which I feel, and again, I'm too stupid and too unknowledgeable about these issues to be able to address. But if the observer effect could be completely eliminated, and it can't, it absolutely cannot, then the measurement problem kind of goes away, I think, right? Because the thing that I've kind of sussed out of what I've heard, what little I know, is that essentially the fact that, like, the observations that we perform the level at which we perform them requires that we're making some kind of physical change on the items that are involved in the quantum state. And this is where I'm like, okay, maybe you've got a problem, maybe you don't. I'm too stupid to see, and I don't feel like he's argued the case of that. He does go into some very, very interesting ways of getting around what he sees as this ontological fracture, which is basically a matter of that reality can't be what's being represented in the quantum physics, that it's like it doesn't tell a coherent story, essentially, about reality. That entanglement itself is kind of problematic. Now, I found it kind of interesting when he got to the later sides of things, in particular the psychic interpretations, which, let me see if I can find the page for this, see if I can remind myself. This was really hard reading for me. Which is basically a matter of that essentially it's our mental processes that are causing all of this. And this is something different from the observer effect, which is that the observation itself is going to change the state of the experiment. The actual act of the observation is going to do things that could conceivably cause the collapse, right? And this leads to some very, very interesting sort of capabilities. One of the most potent ones is where it fits into my concept of magic, which essentially, if the mind itself is responsible for how the outcomes and the entanglements work, then we should be able to affect things by using our mind and training it, essentially. And that, in my own sort of mysticism, I kind of believe that in some sort of way. Not fully, Largely I'm a rational person with some irrational, belief systems that, I sort of buy into. I think the way a lot of religious people do, and that's why I call it my mysticism. To the extent that, like, yes, if you focused your will enough, you're able to address um, what I'd call the underlying capabilities. And where did I get this from? Well, when I started trying to design a magic system for a role playing game, this is what I made the basis of it. And then I started to say, you know what? It kind of makes sense, right? It kind of makes sense to do it this way. And if we're going to talk about any kind of magical capabilities or anything like that, this is actually the only way that uh, I can justify them. And I kind of want magic. So, just like somebody might want an imaginary sky god to be their friend, I kind of want to be able to influence that spooky action at a distance, essentially. Um, there are other. That is actually one way, supposedly, of creating a real story out of, a real ontology, but it can cause other problems down the line if you take something along that line. Similarly, things like a multiverse type of thing where each path is taken in different universes. It would just be this infinitely cascade. Well, okay, it wouldn't be, because maybe nothing's infinite. So, but it would be this humongous cascading of universes created by every little quantum change, which could reflect, a humongous amount of different facets, different worlds, and that also apparently allows you to create an ontology that accepts quantum physics, and it's one of the reasons for coping with it. Another that's of course that's interesting to me is the solipsistic collapse, which is that essentially any solipsism. This is all my imagination. I am the only real being, right? That will also apparently work within this. But when I was reading about the psychic interpretations, I'm trying to see if I can find the piece that I was there. It goes with a many minds discussion as well, which doesn't allow for the same sort of, magical type capabilities. But whatever, when I was reading that, I started formulating more about my magic system, right? Which is that essentially consciousness is, and this was the one thing that I really kind of enjoyed out of reading this, was my sitting out on the porch thinking about this side of it, that consciousness is, I can't find the words. Well, that these little randomnesses create a consciousness by combining together. And that essentially everything has its own little consciousness. And when you combine that with like the concept that you'd be able to modify the quantum states or whatever by your own consciousness, you would also be able to sort of negotiate with other objects. I keep wanting to say inherent. That's not the word I want. It's close to that. Emergent, that consciousness emerges in all things, and that's where my sort of animism comes from, and that it's not really apparent in certain types of objects like a rock, to a large extent because their consciousness moves very, very slowly. That consciousness can move at different rates within different kinds of things. And it kind of fits in with things like the Gaia hypothesis and stuff like that. But, also when we look at like how fungi end up communicating with each other and seeming to operate at a level that's beyond the organism. And you can make similar kinds of arguments with things like bees and stuff, that the organism is larger than the physical bodies, and that the consciousness might be contained over the sum of many beings, none of which can speak or anything, right? And it feels like a similar sort of thing could be happening on the physical world. Not what was intended to be taken from this. I get the feeling that this is sort of just the author, Alessio Serafini, his sort of, yes, there is a real issue here, but sort of having fun with the issue more than anything else in a lot of ways. There's humor in it that may not be apparent to everyone, but and to some extent he comes to the fact that simply we may not be capable, or maybe no mind, to put it better, no mind is capable of understanding the whole. The same way that you get, things like Gödel's incompleteness theorem. You have something similar in physics where it's like there's no way of actually really expressing reality and capturing it all. So that's all very very intriguing to me, but I don't feel like I walked away from this book with any real understanding of what the book was really trying to do. And I tried looking up ontological fractures to see if it was used anywhere else. No, this is just his term that he made for this case. Anyway, I felt like I owed it some discussion because somebody really went out of their way to get this to me. But unfortunately, I'm not smart enough to be able to decipher something like this, especially to the extent of really, really understanding enough about the quantum side of things to be able to even kind of get where these formula that he brings into it and whatnot, maybe they're just not introduced enough. But I was left kind of scratching my head saying, okay, so this formula that came up from something that I just have to believe it came from something. It's like God coming down and telling me when it's given here. Obviously, I have some belief that, scientists have done experimentation and thought and whatnot to come up with these. Doesn't really work. You can't use two different sets of formula that both come from quantum mechanics or quantum physics. And yes, so what? So what? I'm not clever enough and not knowledgeable enough to be able to work out what are sort of the introductory levels of this. I did find the later parts more interesting, but mainly because they sent me on flights of fancy. If you have a quantum physics background, this might be a really enjoyable read. Without it, I did take my enjoyment out of it, but yeah, I'm not smart enough for it, I'm afraid. All right, cheers.